In the late 1800s, European empires were conquering Africa at an astonishing speed. Kingdom after kingdom fell. Empire after empire disappeared. Many African rulers accepted foreign control. One king refused. His name was Behanzin. He ruled the powerful Kingdom of Dahomey. And when the French Empire demanded submission, he chose war. His army included some of the most feared warriors in Africa, an elite force of women known to history as the Dahomey Amazons. Together, they would fight one of the most dramatic resistance campaigns in African history. And even when defeat became inevitable, King Béhanzin refused to kneel. This is the true story of the African king who would rather lose his kingdom than surrender his freedom. Long before European colonial powers arrived in West Africa, the Kingdom of Dahomey had already established itself as one of the most powerful states in the region. Located in what is now modern-day Benin, Dahomey was wealthy, organized, and feared by its rivals. Its kings commanded powerful armies. Its leaders controlled important trade routes. Its influence stretched across much of West Africa. But Dahomey was different from many other kingdoms. Among its most famous defenders was an elite military force unlike anything European soldiers had ever seen. The Dahomey Amazons. Thousands of highly trained female warriors. Disciplined, fearless, and absolutely loyal to their king. European visitors often struggled to believe what they were seeing. Women serving as professional soldiers. Women leading attacks. Women fighting with extraordinary courage. By the late 19th century, King Béhanzin ruled this powerful kingdom. He understood that European empires were expanding rapidly across Africa. He watched neighboring territories disappear beneath foreign flags. And he knew Dahomey would eventually face the same threat. The question was not if. The question was when. By the 1880s, France was expanding aggressively across West Africa. French officials wanted complete control of the region. Every independent kingdom represented an obstacle. And Dahomey was one of the largest. French diplomats arrived with demands. They expected compliance. They expected negotiation. And eventually, they expected submission. But King Béhanzin viewed the situation differently. To him, French expansion represented a direct threat to Dahomey's sovereignty. Accepting French control would mean surrendering independence. It would mean surrendering authority. And it would mean surrendering the future of his people. The king rejected growing French pressure. Tensions increased. Negotiations became hostile. Both sides prepared for conflict. War was approaching. When the final demands arrived, King Béhanzin made his decision. He would not surrender. He would not accept foreign rule. And he would not hand over his kingdom without a fight. The decision carried enormous risk. France possessed modern weapons, large armies, and the resources of a global empire. Yet Béhanzin believed some things were worth defending regardless of the odds. The king began preparing for war. Messengers traveled throughout the kingdom. Warriors assembled. Supplies were gathered. Defensive plans were developed. Most importantly, the Dahomey Amazons prepared for battle. The kingdom understood what was coming, and it chose resistance. As war approached, the most feared soldiers in the Kingdom of Dahomey began preparing for battle. The Dahomey Amazons. To their people, they were symbols of courage. To European observers, they seemed almost impossible. An army of women, professional soldiers, elite warriors. Many French officers initially dismissed reports about them. Some assumed the stories had been exaggerated. Others believed the women served only ceremonial roles. The reality was very different. The Amazons trained harder than most soldiers in the world. Their drills were relentless. Their discipline was strict. Their loyalty to the king was unquestionable. From an early age, many were taught that protecting the kingdom came before everything else. Before comfort. Before family. Before fear. As news of the coming invasion spread across Dahomey, The Amazons prepared for what would become one of the greatest tests in their history. Weapons were inspected. Military formations rehearsed. War songs echoed through training camps. Veteran commanders shared lessons from previous battles. The women understood exactly what was at stake. This was not simply another military campaign. This was a fight for survival. A fight for independence. A fight for the future of their homeland. Across villages and towns, people watched the Amazons march toward the front. Some cheered. Others prayed. Many wondered if they would ever see them again. Yet the warriors marched forward without hesitation. Because they believed some things were worth dying for. And freedom was one of them. When French forces crossed into Dahomey territory, many officers expected a quick victory. After all, European armies had already defeated numerous African kingdoms. French commanders believed this campaign would be no different. They expected resistance. But not resistance on this scale. The first clashes shocked them. Dahomey warriors attacked aggressively. The Amazons launched fierce assaults. French soldiers suddenly found themselves facing opponents who refused to retreat. The forests became battlefields. Roads became ambush sites. Every village seemed determined to resist. The war quickly became far more difficult than French planners expected. Reports sent back to commanders described extraordinary bravery among Dahomey's defenders. Again and again, the Amazons charged enemy positions despite overwhelming firepower. Some attacks succeeded. Others ended in tragedy, but their determination never disappeared. French soldiers began speaking about the Amazons with a mixture of fear and respect. Even enemies could not deny their courage. Meanwhile, King Béhanzin continued directing the defense. He understood that every day of resistance mattered. Every battle delayed French control. Every victory inspired his people. And every sacrifice reminded the world that Dahomey would not surrender quietly. As the campaign continued, the fighting became increasingly brutal. French military technology provided significant advantages. Modern rifles, machine guns, artillery, weapons capable of causing terrible destruction. Yet Dahomey's defenders continued fighting. Battle after battle erupted across the kingdom. Villages became defensive strongholds. Forests became killing grounds. The Amazons fought with extraordinary determination. Many attacked despite knowing the odds were against them. Many chose resistance even when retreat might have been safer. French officers later wrote about the courage they witnessed. Some admitted they had never seen soldiers fight with such determination. But courage alone could not stop modern firepower forever. Losses mounted. Supplies became harder to replace. The kingdom began feeling the strain of a prolonged war. Yet King Béhanzin refused to surrender. Each setback strengthened his resolve. He believed that surrendering without resistance would betray generations of ancestors. And so the struggle continued, even as the situation grew more desperate. Eventually, the balance of power became impossible to ignore. French reinforcements continued arriving. New supplies reached the front. Additional weapons strengthened the invasion. Meanwhile, Dahomey's resources were shrinking. The kingdom had fought with incredible courage. But courage could not create ammunition. Courage could not replace lost soldiers. Courage could not stop an empire indefinitely. Important defensive positions fell. Strategic routes were captured. The capital itself became vulnerable. As French forces advanced deeper into the kingdom, entire communities faced uncertainty. Families fled. Leaders debated the future. Warriors continued fighting. But many understood that the kingdom's survival was becoming increasingly unlikely. Still, King Béhanzin refused to surrender. Even when defeat seemed inevitable. Even when others urged compromise. The king remained committed to resistance. Because for him, freedom was worth every sacrifice. By late 1894, the war was effectively over. The Kingdom of Dahomey had been defeated. French forces controlled the territory. The royal palaces had fallen. The great kingdom that had once dominated much of West Africa was no longer free. But King Béhanzin still refused to submit. 4 months. He avoided capture, moving through forests, traveling between loyal communities, continuing resistance whenever possible. French authorities knew something important. As long as Behanzin remained free, the spirit of resistance remained alive. The king had become more than a ruler. He had become a symbol of independence, a symbol of defiance, a symbol of African resistance against colonial conquest. Eventually, the situation became impossible. The kingdom was gone. The army had been scattered. The Dahomey Amazons had suffered devastating losses. And many of the king's supporters feared further destruction if the struggle continued. In 1894, Behanzin finally surrendered. Not because he accepted French rule, not because he agreed with defeat, but because continuing the war would bring even more suffering to his people. The French immediately removed him from his homeland. He was sent into exile. First to Martinique in the Caribbean, thousands of miles away from Africa, thousands of miles away from the people he had fought to protect. Imagine that moment. A king who had once commanded armies, a king who had ruled a powerful nation, now standing on foreign soil, separated from everything he had ever known, separated from his kingdom, separated from his people, separated from his history. Yet even in exile, he refused to become a symbol of submission. He never publicly accepted French domination. He never abandoned the ideals he had fought for. And because of that, his reputation only grew stronger. Although the Kingdom of Dahomey had fallen, its story was far from over. History has a strange way of remembering courage. Empires rise. Empires fall. Borders change. Governments disappear. But bravery survives. And the courage shown by King Béhanzin and the Dahomey Amazons survived long after the war ended. Throughout the 20th century, their story spread far beyond Benin. Historians studied their resistance. Writers told their story. Artists painted their battles. And future generations looked back at Dahomey as an example of determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The Amazons became legendary. Even their enemies had acknowledged their courage. French soldiers who fought against them often wrote about their fearlessness, their discipline, their willingness to fight until the very end. Meanwhile, King Béhanzin became one of Africa's most respected anti-colonial figures. His refusal to surrender became part of his legacy. Many later independence movements across Africa would draw inspiration from leaders like him. Because Béhanzin represented something larger than a kingdom. He represented the belief that freedom was worth defending, even when victory seemed impossible. Today, his memory remains strong in Benin. Monuments honor him. Historians continue studying him, and people continue remembering the king who refused to kneel before an empire. History often remembers the victors, the empires, the conquerors, the nations that expanded their power. But sometimes, history remembers something even more important: the people who refused to surrender. King Béhanzin knew the odds. He understood the power of the French Empire. He knew his kingdom faced enormous challenges. Yet he chose resistance anyway. Not because victory was guaranteed, not because success was certain, but because freedom mattered, because independence mattered, because dignity mattered. Throughout his life, he faced decisions that would define his legacy. He could have accepted foreign control. He could have avoided conflict. He could have chosen comfort over resistance. Instead, he chose to fight. And although the kingdom eventually fell, the spirit behind that resistance never disappeared. More than a century later, people still remember his courage. They still remember the Dahomey Amazons. They still remember the kingdom that stood against an empire. Because true leadership is not measured only by victories. Sometimes, it is measured by what a person is willing to defend, even when defeat seems inevitable. And that is why the story of King Béhanzin continues to inspire people around the world. Not because he conquered nations, but because he refused to abandon his principles. And in doing so, he became immortal in history. What do you think? If you were King Béhanzin, would you have surrendered early to protect your people? Or would you have continued fighting for independence no matter the cost? Tell us your answer in the comments below. And here's another question. Do you think history gives enough recognition to African leaders like King Béhanzin and the Dahomey Amazons? Or are these stories still overlooked today? Share your thoughts. Because history becomes more meaningful when we discuss it together. And if this documentary taught you something new, please like, share, follow, and subscribe for more powerful African history documentaries. Because some of the greatest heroes in human history are not the ones who conquered the world. They are the ones who stood their ground when the world tried to conquer them. And King Béhanzin was one of them.